Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to have with us today Mariagiovanna Baccara, who is going to talk about research waves. This is a joint work with Gilat, Levy, and Ronny, Razin. And we also have, Gilat is also with us today, and we'll have as guest panelists Steve Callander and Julia Salmi. So thank you all for joining us today. Mariagiovanna, the mic is yours.
Thank you so much, Angel, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here virtually. So let me actually share my slides so that, okay. So yes, so this is, and yes, it's a pleasure to be here. So thank you so much. And thank you for all of us for joining today. So this paper is joined with Gilat, Levy, and Ronny Razin, both at LSE. Gilat is already present. It's in, she's here to, and she'll be in the chat to answer all your questions. And Ronny may join a bit later, okay? But of course, if you want to ask me a question directly, always feel free to just unmute yourself and ask me, okay? So the motivation of this paper is, just a simple observation that research is important, is a driving force of economic growth. There is a lot of money that is being spent on research, 679 billion in the US in 2022, a substantial portion of GDP. A substantial portion of this spending is in academic institutions, both through in-house funding, but also federal funding. So over time, over the decades, many scholars have discussed how scientific knowledge is produced, is generated, from Weber in 1918 on Kuhn, etc. I would say that a recurring theme in these discussions about knowledge creation is the fact that research seems to be characterized by mainstream paradigms that people worked on for a long time. And sometimes they get replaced by new paradigms, by new approaches that change things around. Okay, so, and this is something to keep in mind. I'll come back to this observation at the end of the talk, but something to keep in mind for later. So, research is characterized by vast externalities to the rest of society. Innovation is important for society. But research is done by people, by people like us, and by scientists are driven by individual incentives: getting tenure, getting promotions, receiving grants, getting higher salaries, and so on. So, driven by these individual incentives, people sort themselves into different fields of investigation or different approaches. Okay. So while information is uncovered by people that are already working in a field, researchers decide in which field to specialize, so that, different fields grow, sometimes end, basically, driven, and these dynamics are driven by the specialization choices of people of new researchers. So, the main observation here is that typically the specialization choices of researchers depend on the current perceptions about the different options on the menu. Okay, I want typically to specialize in a field that is perceived as important, typically by my peers, by other scientists, right? But such perception typically depends on the relative intensity with which different fields have been explored in the past, right? So, for example, many people have been explored a field in the past. So if a lot of people have explored a field in the past, there is a lot of information available on how promising that field is. But if not a lot of people have explored another field, right? So there is less information available on another option. So the idea here is that the information that is already uncovered for each specialization choice is endogenous and affects further choices of researchers that join later. Okay, so this is the sort of the main the focus of our paper. Okay, so in this sense, what are the research questions that we're focusing on? What is the structure of the equilibrium research waves? Okay, so, and by research waves here, I mean the specialization choices of researchers over time. Okay, what are the factors that determine their size and shape? And in which environments research diversification actually arises. So researchers in equilibrium will tend to explore different fields rather than all the same one. And another research question we're interested in is what happens when institutions such as P&T promotion committees or professional organizations or the government itself influence through some the scientists' incentives through some policy tools. Okay, and we'll actually consider 3 different classes of tools. First mover advantages that researchers that specialize in a field relatively early can get if they, for example, if their work start accumulating citations of others. Deadlines such as tenure clock or subsidies. So the government or some other entity can intervene directly by granting scientific grants to one field or the other. Okay, so we'll be talking about these policy tools. Okay, so having said that, what are the main ingredients of the paper in terms of what is our theoretical framework? So as a sort of methodological workhorse, we'll use a continuous time bandit problem, a Poisson bandit problem with 2 risky fields, okay? And we'll analyze, as is very common in this literature, we'll analyze separately the case of bad news. So bad news is a case in which the arrival of new information takes the form of bad news on a field arriving over time or breakdowns. Just to fix idea, think about the pharmaceutical industry, for example, in which a new drug typically goes through the FDA approval rounds. And bad news can arrive in the sense that if some very severe side effects are discovered, actually the drug is declared not viable. But as the drug keeps on going through the round and without bad news arriving, typically people become more and more optimistic about the viability of the drug. So on the opposite side, so we'll also analyze the opposite case, which is the good news case, in which the research is information arrival is characterized by breakthroughs over time. So, and by breakthrough, you can think, for example, just again, to fix idea, to think about an example, think about new products that are based on completely new concepts. So, for example, the commercialization of products that are derived, that are related to, I don't know, large language models, artificial intelligence, or something like this. So think about new concepts that are commercialized into new products. So everybody knows, so we all know that there are people working on this, but the news that we're waiting for is actually the implementation of the product, the arrival of this new product on the market. And as time goes by, without this implementation, maybe we started being increasingly pessimistic about the viability of the concept. Okay, so these are just the 2 cases. So that we'll analyze separately. So, but just to go back, so this is the first main ingredient of of the model. Second main ingredient. At any point in time, each individual can either join a field, especially can specialize in a field, or wait for more information. Okay, so once this individual joins a field, that choice is irreversible. Okay, so the second main ingredient of the model will be irreversibility. Okay. And third is the fact that information arrival is endogenous and it is determined by the mass of agents who already joined the field. Okay, so preview of the results. In the bad news case, we obtain a slow bandwagon wave. So unless bad news arrive on that field, all researchers will specialize in the same field, okay? And we characterize that wave, we characterize its properties, convex, length is bounded above, with some comparative static result regarding that wave. And we find, like when we analyze policy tools, we find that that bandwagon wave is actually very persistent. It's very hard to break, okay? So, you'll see it at the end. Okay, we hope to break that. We hope to break the wave and we tried in different ways, and we actually found that it's actually very robust to policy intervention. In the good news case, the equilibrium looks very different. So we'll get sequential surges in which both fields sometimes can be explored, and will characterize the environment in which both fields are actually explored. The probability of both fields being explored increases in the agent pool size, so in the population size, but also in the efficacy of the information production technology. We'll also study different properties about this equilibrium, some comparative statics. And in terms of policy, you will see that first mover advantages, such as citations benefits, for example, and deadlines, such as tenure clock, may actually prevent diversification. They never facilitate, they never make diversification more likely, and sometimes they may actually kill it. But grants that are well designed, so grants sometimes can actually facilitate diversification. And in terms of theoretical contribution, you will see that the presence of two risky arms and irreversibility both are elements that affect the analysis. Okay, so there is some related literature that I won't have time. I don't have time to go through it in detail, but just there is a vast literature on strategic experimentation. So, and typically this literature is focused on the presence of one risky arm, so one risky field for us, with some notable exceptions that study different kind of questions. And instead, thematically, clearly our papers is related to two different lines of literature that are they are in itself actually related to each other. The literature on innovation and R&D and evolution of science. I already mentioned a couple of scholars that studied it in the past, and here there are some additional, more recent references. Okay, so
Mariagiovanna, can I just ask a question? So it's very nice, the good news and bad news case. Another possibility is to have the news arrive as a Brownian motion or some other process like that. Just quickly and out of curiosity, is that technically too hard? Is it uninteresting? Is it unrealistic to do it that way? Just why are we doing it this way?
It's a good question. This is this is a choice we made earlier on. We didn't try to do it clearly the literature. The literature clearly divides itself into these two approaches. We haven't tried the other one. I would not say it's not feasible or too difficult. I don't know about that, but it's something that we can think about later. Okay, but yeah, we don't know. So the model. So with a continuous time, infinite horizon setting with a continuum of identical agents. There are two independent and risky fields, A and B, that can either be viable or not viable. The priors of viability at time zero are PA0 and PB0, and PA0 is strictly bigger than PB0. So field A is the dominant field at the beginning. So at any time, each agent can wait or irreversibly join a field, okay, A or B. And as I said, I mean, and that choice is reversible. So once an agent joins a field, from that point on, that agent starts getting a flow payoff, okay, that is pi tau v, as you can see on the slide. And what does that basically mean? That, I mean, the payoff that the agent starts receiving from the moment in which he joins the field on depends on the current perception of that field in the future, right? So basically, the idea here is that once I join a field, my salary increases, my chances of promotions, and so on, increase if the field I'm working on is perceived as more important, okay, or more promising. So, and, you know, there is a common discount rate R. Okay, so the information arrival, so there is a total mass of...
Let me ask about the payoff structure. So in research, we are in information generation industry in a sense, but if I understand correctly, there is no benefit of generating these breakthroughs or breakdowns. So that is not a payoff for researcher. Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's not, well, I mean, if there is, yes, so there is no benefit in generating, there is no, let's say, yes, benefit, direct benefit in, or additional benefit that comes from, you know, when there is a breakthrough or a breakdown, exactly. Okay, when there is a breakthrough, so the posterior jumps to 1, right? So in that sense, that creates a benefit. But on the opposite, when there is a breakdown, it goes to 0. So yes, no, if I was helpful to generate a breakdown, that doesn't help me at all, actually. Okay, so, but yes, good point, good question. Okay. So the total mass of agent is M, and MIT is the mass of agents who already joined field I at time t. Okay, so clearly MIT is weak because of irreversibility, is weakly increases in t. So the news, and now let's talk about the information generating process. News on viability of each field I. Arrives over time following a Poisson process with an arrival rate lambda MIT. Okay, so lambda MIT represent the information production technology is strictly increasing in MIT, right? And it has a lower and upper bound. Lambda 0 or lambda lower bar is the information arrival when nobody has joined a field yet. And if we put all the agents in the economy in the same field, they generate the arrival rate lambda upper bar. Okay, so lambda upper bar is a proxy for both population size and efficacy of the technology. So if the same amount of people generate a higher lambda upper bar, it means that information production technology is more effective. Okay. So by the way, I will be a little bit loose with my language. I will refer to lambda IT, right? When I talk about a given information arrival, lambda IT, let's say, instead, I will refer to it as an atom of agents, okay? Even if it's not really, these are not really agents, is information arrival generated by those agents, okay? But since there is a one-to-one correspondence between mass of agents and the information arrival they produce, I can use this sort of language. Okay, so so the assumption here is that there are 2 layers of assumptions we're working under. So first of all, a viable field can only generate good news, and a non-viable field can only generate bad news. So the first arrival of news is conclusive evidence that the field is either viable or not viable. Okay, and as I said before, we focus only on 2 cases: the bad news case, in which a viable field generates no news. Okay, so there is only the only news that arrive are bad, are breakdowns. So if in the absence of news, the posteriors increase over time. And the good news, a non-viable field generates no news. So if there are no news arriving, the posterior go down over time. So there are these two quick lemmas that help the analysis a lot, and they apply to both the good news and the bad news case, which is, first of all, this is just a consequence of the law of iterative expectation. So if an agent joins a field at time t, the expected continuation payoff for that agent are P of the field that is joined, V over R. Okay, so basically the current perception, I mean, I get a payoff that depends on the current perception of that field at the moment of joining it. And also, lemma 2 says that if nobody has joined any field yet, then the two posteriors cannot cross. Okay, so as long as people don't join any field, field A remains the most promising one. The two lemmas together imply that the first field to be explored has to be A. Okay, so it's always A. So, okay, so let's start from the bad news case. So the bad news case is relatively simpler. So I will try to be pretty relatively quick on it, but I will just like give you the highlights. Okay, so first of all, and this applies to both cases. So as soon as news arrives in this model, if there are still researchers that have not specialized yet, so for example, in the bad news case, if bad news arrive on a field and there are researchers that are still not specialized, all these leftover people will go to the other field, okay? So, and that will be the end of the game, right? So the only thing that we really need to characterize here is what happens while no news has arrived yet. Okay, so as we know already, the posteriors in the bad news case increase over time, and we can write down the value function of the strategy that consists in, okay, so think about an agent at time 0. This agent can think, okay, so my strategy is to wait for news until a certain time S. So if bad news arrives before S, I will of course join the other field. But at S, if no news has arrived yet, I will join the field with the highest posterior at that time. Okay, so this is the value function that we have here. So if we think about, okay, so sorry, let me find. So given that, okay, so I will go back to that value function. But so given this, let me give you the characterization of the equilibrium in the bad news case directly. Okay, so in the bad news case, so this is pretty simple. So if agents are patient enough, and I will tell you what I mean in a second. So if agents are patient enough, in the unique equilibrium, there are two cutoff times at which basically at 0, they start waiting, right? And they all wait until the first cutoff. And when the first cutoff arrives, they start gradually joining field A, okay? And they all join A, okay, until all agents are joined field A. Okay, so there is basically a bandwagon wave into field A. Okay, sorry. Unless, so in this equilibrium, field B is never explored, right? So unless, so the only circumstances in which field B is explored is if bad news on A arrives early enough. Okay, what do I mean by early enough? When there are still people left that have not specialized in A yet. Okay, so note that if people are relatively more impatient, I mean, that wave just starts immediately, okay, at 0. So how is this equilibrium constructed? So think about that function Vs that I showed you before. That function starts increasing at 0, okay? And then so think about an agent here that has to decide whether to join A immediately, or wait a little bit more, okay? So what is the benefit of waiting? The benefit of waiting is to see whether bad news arrives on A, okay? So formally, what is the benefit of waiting? The benefit of waiting is, okay, so this is the probability with which bad news arrive on A, right? And if bad news arrive on A, I will switch to B, and I will make this continuation payoff rather than 0. What is the cost of waiting? The cost of waiting is before joining A is actually the foregone income, right? So the payoff flow that I'm sacrificing since I'm not joining immediately, okay? So basically, as I said, that function Vs increases at 0 until it peaks, right? So, and the peak is characterized by this first order. We can show that this peak is characterized by first order condition. Okay, so this is what so graphically, let me show you this, this condition that I just showed you can be translated into this construction, okay? So look, nobody's joining B, right? So this ratio goes down, right? So people become increasingly optimistic on B, so this ratio decreases over time, okay? So in terms of A, this ratio is higher than this at the beginning, but decreases faster, okay? So there is a certain point. So here, basically, the benefit of waiting is higher than the cost of, the marginal benefit of waiting is higher than the marginal cost of waiting. So people wait until that function Vs peaks, okay? At that point, the two are the same, okay? And I start now to build the equilibrium bandwagon wave by start increasing lambda A, okay? So by start increasing the arrival rate in A. And I do it in a way, okay, so, and so the equilibrium law that governs the entry in A is actually this, it keeps the function Vs constant over the interval V lower bar, V upper bar, okay? And then until everybody has joined, and at that point it goes down again, okay? So this is how we build the bandwagon wave. I won't spend too much time on this, but we show that this bandwagon wave is actually convex, okay? So the equilibrium lambda process is convex, and it's actually asymptotically so. So this bandwagon wave cannot last forever, okay? It has actually, its length is bounded above. So as the people in the economy, as the mass of people in the economy gets arbitrarily large, actually the length of this wave is bounded above, okay? So, and we also get have some comparative statics result on this equilibrium. What we show is that as we pull the priors further apart from each other, the entry in A starts earlier, so the wave starts earlier, but is lower. Okay, so if we look at the same elapsed time in the wave, actually the equilibrium lambda will be lower for a higher prior of A, for example. Okay, so and yeah, so this is the comparative static result. Okay, so again, as the two priors get further apart, the wave starts earlier and becomes slower. And, you know, there is some intuition here, but let me actually skip and go to the good news case.
Mariagiovanna, can I ask a question? Because I'm very confused about one thing, and I have a very high priority that I missed something here. But yeah. Why? So there's no heterogeneity amongst individuals here, right? So this is done by using indifference, essentially. You construct entrants like that. Is that how you're doing it? Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
follow up on this. I should have mentioned this.
Yes. Okay.
As I said, remember when I said, look, the trickling into field A, right,
Yeah.
is done to keep, sorry.
Yeah, you're using that V prime s equal to 0 condition, essentially. That's what you're doing.
Exactly. This is the picture, okay? So
Yeah.
basically, the way in which the equilibrium lambda A process is constructed is to keep the equilibrium, the first order conditions satisfied along the way, right? So you see, basically, to keep the marginal benefit and the marginal cost of waiting equal to each other along the whole interval. Okay, so this is why I said, look, I'm going to take the peak of Vs, and then I'm building the process lambda to keep Vs constant over that interval. And that's exactly the indifference condition you're talking about.
Right. So it wouldn't work to have somebody like the whole mass joining immediately, because I mean, suppose, and could you give an intuition for that? Why does that equilibrium not exist?
Because then there would be an incentive to wait, right? Because then I would get all this information.
So in a way, you're assuming that they cannot coordinate. You go first, and then I'll go when it gets to at some point. It's a bit like they kind of agree who's gonna go first, who's gonna go second.
Yeah, they're all indifferent. So
Yeah. Okay.
exactly.
All right. Thanks.
But it's irreversible, right? So there's no one wants to go first.
Why nobody wants to go? They are all indifferent. They are all indifferent.
Well, the irreversibility that if I go first and the bad news appears, then you get all the benefits. So I'd much rather go second. It's not just a coordination problem that they can agree as to who you go first, I go second. There's these big benefits to going second.
But I'm indifferent. I'm indifferent between going immediately and waiting. And the benefit for waiting is exactly that. And the benefit of waiting exactly comes from what you're talking about, right? The benefit of waiting is exactly because if I wait, bad news can arrive on A, and then I have the opportunity to switch, right? So, but the equilibrium constructed so that I'm indifferent between the two.
And the benefit of going in instead is that you start getting payoffs, basically.
Exactly.
That's the benefit. Yeah. Okay.
I showed you. Exactly right. Yeah. Okay, so the good news case. Okay, so in the good news case, I mean, this is the construction. I mean, the preliminaries here are pretty similar to the bad news case. Once good news arrive on a field, all remaining agents, the agents that have not specialized yet, join that field. Okay, and they get V over R, right? At that point, they know that the field is good, so there is no P going here, right? So again, as before, we only need to characterize what happens in equilibrium conditional on no news arriving. Okay, on no news arrive yet. Okay. So since we're in the good news case, in the absence of new, posteriors decrease over time. Okay, according to, I mean, again, this is just sorry, I did not mention it before for the bad news, but this is just Bayesian updating. Okay, so this process that governs the decrease in posterior. And as before, I can write down the value of a strategy very similar to the strategy that I described before, right? I can write the value of waiting until a certain time S. If news arrived before S, then of course I join the field that generated the good news. But if no news has arrived up to S, at that point I join again by lemma 1. Remember the field with the highest current posterior. Okay, so look, because of lemma 2, so clearly. Field A is still the first one under consideration to be joined, right? So suppose now that I'm planning to join field A, and I'm thinking of whether to join or to wait. Why wait now? Well, now I'm waiting what the benefit of waiting comes from the fact that good news may arrive on B, okay? So what is the first order condition of that value function? I mean, what the first order condition boils down to? Look what happens. Okay, so what is the benefit of waiting a little bit more here before joining A? Good news may arrive on B. This is the probability with which good news arrive on B, right? And if good news arrive on B, I join B instead, right? And I get a continuation payoff of V over R rather than PAS V over R, right? So I make one rather than PAS, okay? So this is the benefit of waiting. The cost of waiting is exactly the same as before, is the foregone income, because I waited rather than start getting that payoff, right? So this is now the first order condition that governs the first order condition in the good news case, okay? So look, when people plan to join A, nobody has joined B yet, right? So lambda BS is lambda lower bar, okay? So just for kicks here, let's try to build a similar trickling process as the one that I built for the bad news case, okay? So if we want to build some kind of indifference through trickling, as I did before, I need, as before, to keep this first order condition satisfied over time, right? Over a certain interval. However, this is impossible, okay? So think about it. So for this condition to be satisfied over time, since, remember, lambda, this is a lambda lower bar for B, right? PAS should decrease at a slower rate than PBS. And this is impossible because along the trickling, people start joining A, right? So the posterior of A has to decrease at a faster rate than the posterior of B, okay? So it cannot be slower, it's faster. So we cannot actually build the process, that generates the indifference that we had before. So what is the consequence of that is that entry into A can only happen to an atom of agent all joining A at the same time, okay? So, by the way, we can show that the incentive to join A go down over time, okay? So what's the implication here is that this atom of agent either join A at the beginning at time 0 or they wait forever, okay? And we have some some regions here in the good news case in which actually people wait forever, okay? But suppose that they don't, okay? Suppose that they are actually impatient enough that an atom of agent is willing to join A at 0. So if an atom of agent is actually willing to join A at 0, the posterior of A starts going down faster than the posterior of B. Okay, sorry. Here we have posterior of A that is higher than the posterior of B, but the posterior of A now goes down faster than the posterior of B, meaning at a certain point they will cross. But if they cross, the exploration of B is now possible. We open the door to the exploration of B, right? Because there is a reversal of posterior. So maybe if other people wait long enough, they will be actually willing to join B instead. So diversification of research can happen maybe in the future, okay? So let's try to keep on trying to build this equilibrium, okay? So what we have so far is that we created conditions under which an atom of agent is willing to join A at time 0, okay? So in that sense, we open the door to the exploration of B, okay? But how does that work, okay? So, and when, sorry, it works. So to see the construction of this equilibrium, consider this function, BBS, okay? So this is the lambda A, lambda B, okay? So this is utility weight and join B some point in the future, S, when lambda A and lambda B are actually kept constant over time from 0 to S, okay? Note, okay, so besides the, the details here, note that, let's just think about the intuition. Note that this function has to increase in lambda A, okay? What do I mean by that? So think about an agent that is thinking of joining B in the future and is thinking about the value of joining B in the future. The more people have joined A at time 0, so the higher lambda A is, the more information I have available while I wait, right? So that has to increase the value of the strategy that I'm considering for any S, okay? So in other words, higher lambda A's increase the value of waiting to enter B, okay? So this is a key observation. So now think about the agents that are considering planning to join B in the future. So if I'm planning to join B, why do I wait? Now I wait to see if good news arrive on A, right? So the first, the benefit and cost of waiting are now represented by, the following derivative, right? So think about, so I'm planning to join B and waiting for good news on A. So the benefit of waiting a small amount of time, additional time, is the following, right? So good news on A arrive with this probability. And if good news on A arrive, I join A instead of B, and I get this net benefit, right? The cost of waiting is the foregone income, since I'm delaying my joining B now, okay? So, very good. So, look, at this point, actually, let me draw a little picture here. So, just to fix idea. So, this is the value of A at 0, okay? And this is the value of B at 0, okay? So, the value of joining A at 0, so we make sure that it decreases over time so that actually an atom of people have an incentive to join at 0, and then it flattens out. Anyway, it remains kind of underground here, underwater, in the sense that we make sure that it never crosses this initial payoff again, okay? And so now think about the value of this function that I showed you before, okay? So the value of this function, sorry. So this function, as I said before, increases in lambda A, right? So here they cross at a certain point, but suppose that this function has a peak here, okay? So if this function, the value of joining B has a peak at this point, okay, suppose that I keep on increasing lambda A, okay? And as I keep on increasing lambda A, I'm actually increasing the peak because, as I said before, I'm shifting this whole function up, right? And suppose that the idea here is that I keep on increasing lambda A until the peak of the function VB happens exactly at the same value of the payoff that people that join A at 0 got, okay? So basically the idea here is that I adjusted lambda A, so the size of the atom of people that join A at 0, to guarantee the indifference between joining A at 0 and joining B later on at its peak. Okay, so this is basically, and this is how I build this equilibrium, okay? So this pins, so this indifference condition pins down two equilibrium variables at the same time. Lambda A, okay? Lambda A, and also the time at which people can enter B. So the time of the peak, okay? These two are actually pinned down simultaneously, okay? And that's, so by doing that, with this construction, I actually make sure that people are willing to wait and join B later on in the future, okay? So that's what I have so far. So now...
That's, if I understand correctly, that's a very interesting dynamic. So what's happening is people pile into A, it doesn't work, and we pass the point where we think B is the better alternative to go into.
Exactly.
But we all sit back and wait, and the old generation is still pounding away at A. It's failing. So we all know we should be, if we were to do something, we would do something different, but there's a big delay before we actually do it.
Exactly.
I think that I can see that in a few fields that we're familiar with. Yes.
Exactly. We're we're waiting because there are these people that are working for us, right? And I want to, and we need, for this equilibrium to work, we need to maintain that indifference.
Mm-hmm.
We have to make sure that people that join B later on are actually indifferent to the people that join.
And is it?
Oh, sorry, Giulio, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so I was about to ask if it's so that actually baseline learning, this positive lambda lower bar is not that important. So first, when you introduced how the equilibrium works here, I thought, okay, it's super important that we can learn from B to get good news, but that's not at all important, actually.
I should have mentioned that lambda lower bar can be 0. Yeah, everything would work. Yes. I mean, the only thing, lambda lower, yes, exactly. So we can talk more about this after, but lambda lower bar can be 0. Yeah.
So can I try to see if I understand? Because maybe, so the way this works is that you have to have that, the VB thing that then becomes that line that crosses the dash thing doesn't go above. So that because at that point you break the indifference. So you have to have exactly the right number of people at time 0 joining A. That's going to generate so that's going to determine your theta A that you need, and then the rest is going to join B at that point. So you need this function to have very nice properties. You need it to look like the thing that you've drawn. For example, I'm noticing that it's decreasing first, perhaps, and then it goes back up and it's concave in the relevant region and so on. So am I right that you know this is always going to be the case?
So lambda A, that depends on lambda A. So lambda A changes many things in the VB function, changes the level, okay? It also changes the derivative, as you can see here, right? It affects the derivative. So as I increase lambda A, this will be, the derivative in general will go up, right? And then what we show, and that's always true, that eventually VB eventually at the limit decreases. So the derivative of VB decreases at the limit. So we guarantee we prove the existence of this peak. Is not, we don't assume it.
So there could be multiple peaks that do what this thing does.
No, there are not multiple peaks. We show that it's only one.
Okay.
But good question. Yes. No, we show, we take, yes, we can talk more about it, but basically we take care of that. Okay. So, but again, we guarantee an equilibrium for this to behave exactly this way. It's not an assumption on the structure. We don't make assumption on the structure of this. Okay. VB is determined just by inequilibrium. All right, so let me finish the equilibrium construction here. We're not done yet, right? So what we are here, where we are here is at the point in which I guarantee that people will be willing to join B at T star. Okay, so the problem is how many people, there may be a lot of people left here. So by the way, let me say one thing here. Remember, at this point, I pin down lambda A, right? So it could be that lambda A is just too high. There are just not enough people in this economy. So if that's the case, forget diversification. Everybody in the economy will join A at 0, end of the story, right? So, but now suppose that there are, a necessary condition for diversification is the pool of people in the economy, or again, the efficacy of the information production technology being high enough, okay? So this is a necessary condition for diversification to arise. So we are under, so let's be under the assumption that lambda upper bar is bigger than lambda A, okay, than the lambda A that we pinned down. Okay, so now the question is, how many people go into B at T star? So, and that's my next step, okay, so, so what is the next step here? So, actually, I will use this picture. Look, we can, so how many people, so the atom of people that I send into B at T star affects this equilibrium, affects this derivative through the PBs, right? Look, if I send too many people into B, then PB starts going down too fast, okay? And as PB starts going too fast, I create the incentive for people to wait. So the equilibrium breaks down, okay? So I need, so remember, this was a peak, okay? And I need now to send people into B in a way that this peak is preserved, okay? So in particular, how do I do it? Okay, so the derivative here is 0, right? And I actually go back to trickling now. I start sending people, after sending an atom of B at B, to make sure actually that derivative of VB coming out of T0 stays flat. I keep on trickling people into B to maintain that derivative at 0, to maintain this to be equal to 0, okay? So look, this is kind of surprising because remember, trickling was not possible before on A, but now it's possible into B. And what's the key difference here? The key difference is that the people that I start sending into B remain below the mass of people that join A initially, okay? So PB can actually keeps on decreasing more slowly than PA. And because of that, I can actually sustain trickling into B, okay? So the gradual entry into B is possible, okay? Opposite to what we saw for A. So a key result here that we find is that despite the reversal, and despite the fact that maybe many people in the economy, the size of field B remains bounded above by the size of field A. Okay, so I mean this field that was, so the ranking of the fields at the beginning of the game determines the relative size even later on, despite the reversal and despite the fact that there may be many people left in the economy. Okay, so as the trickling goes to infinity, okay, keeps on to infinity. Suppose that I have many people in the economy, so the trickling goes to infinity. Lambda BS will converge, sorry. Okay, so will converge to, this is the characterization. Lambda BS will converge to lambda AS. And if there are still people, okay, so this is what I wanted to show you. At the limit, LBT will converge to lambda A. And if there are still people left in the economy, they will just wait for news forever, okay, to infinite, okay? There will be, there is here indifference at the limit, okay? So that's what we get, okay? So the equilibrium structure here is, comprises two surges, an initial surge into A, and later on surge into B, followed by trickling into B. But importantly, the size, so here I have the picture, initial surge into A, some time passes, second surge into B, and then trickling into B that continues, but so that lambda B stays below lambda A. Okay, so, okay, very good. So I have not much time left, but let me tell you just one quick thing about comparative statics. So we show, for example, that as the prior of B goes down, lambda A goes up, okay? That it's not surprising, but think about the implications of an increase in lambda A to, what are the implications on diversification of an increase in lambda A? Look, if the equilibrium lambda A increases, so the atom of people that enter into A at the beginning goes up. That makes diversification clearly less likely to happen, right? Because as lambda A, the initial lambda A goes up, I'm more likely to just exhaust everybody in the economy, right? And there are no people left to explore PB, okay? So that's bad news in terms of diversification. However, if there are people left in the economy, the fact that lambda A increases the upper bound for field B as well, okay? So it allows actually more people to wait for, it allows for more people to join B in the future rather than wait forever, okay? So that's, as I said before, increasing lambda makes field B more likely to be explored. And actually, there are some, I mean, I can talk about this later. Yes, so there is some comparative statics that we do with respect to the shape of the function lambda, okay? But let me actually just skip on that because let me, so as I promised, we have some policy, we explore some policy tools. I don't have time to explore them to actually show you the analysis, but let me remember, we explore number one, citation benefits, or more in general, first mover advantage. Number two, deadlines. And number three, grants, scientific grants. Okay, so what we find, and actually let me just jump directly to conclusion. As I said at the beginning, what we find is that the bandwagon wave is very persistent across all these policy tools. Okay, we hope, in particular, with first mover advantages. We actually hope to break the bandwagon wave. It turns out we don't, okay? So the bandwagon wave is persistent, and sometimes scientific grants on B can actually switch the bandwagon wave. It can happen on B rather than in A, but we never get diversification in the bad news case. In the good news case, what we get is that tenure clocks and citation benefits can make the diversification less likely to happen always. Okay, they never facilitate it, and sometimes actually they kill it. Okay, so both tenure clocks and citation benefits are bad for the research diversification. However, well-designed scientific grants that are not too low, not too high on field B can actually make diversification more likely to happen. Okay, so that's the only hope to increase diversification. All right, and so now let me conclude. So in this paper, basically what we do is to take a positive approach, and we study a model of research wave in which scientists sort themselves into alternative fields of studies, okay? We explore the bad news case, bandwagon wave. We explore the good news case in which diversification can happen under certain conditions. You can think about different extensions of this model. But let me talk about welfare for a second. Okay, as I said, we really took a pause. This analysis is a completely positive analysis. So typically in this literature, when people think about welfare, they think about utilitarian welfare. So the aggregate utility of all agents in the model, which are the scientists, right? In our case, are the scientists. So, this is taking the point of view of professional associations, for example, that are, interested in, maximizing the aggregate utility of scientists. However, for our particular application, we find that this is maybe not satisfying enough, right? Because research has vast externalities on the rest of the society. Okay, so we can, one could think, this is a next step here in this research agenda, about a more general societal welfare, let's call it this way. So, this diversification that I kept on talking about throughout the talk from a purely positive perspective, now, can yield actually a social value. Okay, so think about society here. I don't know. We don't really know which virus will be the object of the next pandemic, right? So because of that, there may be value in diversifying research on a sort of diverse portfolio of, vaccines, for example, that focus on different viruses, right? So there may be social value in diversification, okay? And so from this point of view, our results suggest that citation benefits and tenure clocks never help in this society, in this sense. But in the good news case, as I just was mentioning a second ago, well-designed grant can sometimes help to achieve that maybe socially desirable diversification. Okay, so that's all I had to say.
Oh, thank you very much, Mariagiovanna. So it's now time for the Q&A. I'm gonna start with Julia. Julia, do you have any final comment, final questions that maybe you want to put to Mariagiovanna?
Yeah, thank you very much for the great talk. I have two very broad comments / questions. The first one, I find this, like just the baseline model, super interesting with the two risky arms and how you then get an endogenous option value of weighting is great and super interesting. So from that perspective, I would like to understand it better. I appreciate that it might be difficult with, let's say, Brownian learning, but perhaps within like fully revealing Poisson learning, you could still do a bit more to understand what is the role of these jumps and what is the role of the law of motion. So whether the beliefs diverge or converge might be, it seems that they are important for your results. So perhaps you could handle a model with both good news and bad news, or if not, perhaps you could consider a setup where the two fields have different technologies. Let's say that the verse field has a very high baseline rate of learning, so that actually the beliefs could cross even with pure bad news, just as one example. I don't think it would be a very good model of research, but it would help to understand the driving forces in your model. Okay, this was the first one. The second one is that I think that this model is much more general than just about research, including your policy section, like first mover advantage, etc. Maybe one small addition to what you are considering already would be to look at a bit more dynamic payoff environments. So let's say that my payoff as a researcher who has joined field A changes over time if more researchers also join field A, maybe positively or negatively, or maybe there is some bliss point, etc. And maybe that kind of payoff structure could break your bandwagon equilibrium. I don't know. So great work, super interesting. I'm looking forward to learn more.
Thank you, Julia. Let me answer one quick thing. All agree on everything. One quick thing. We are so the citation benefit model that I did not have time to present, but will be in the draft. You saw in the draft, and it will be in the draft in the paper that is going to be circulated soon. Is very stark. We modeled this first mover advantage by basically saying if you are if you are joining a field, when no positive mass of people has joined yet, you get a boost in your payoffs, and otherwise you don't. So it's a very bang bang kind of way to consider, say, first mover advantage. But we worked on a more nuanced model of citation benefits, which is basically exactly what you're suggesting. Basically, my payoffs over time after I join a field depend on go up as more people join the same field after me. Okay, so and we think that citation, it's actually a good way to measure citations. So we thought initially that model would break the bandwagon. So, and in fact, it doesn't. Okay, and the reason, so the idea here is that the bandwagon will still happen. It sometimes it can. So there will be clearly coordination equilibria here. So we can sustain, in certain condition, a bandwagon on B instead than A, okay? In which people, because everybody else will join, I expect a lot of people to join B after me. I actually initially prefer B to A, right? And I can create a bandwagon on B. A key thing to note in this is that to sustain an equilibrium like this, as we go down in the bandwagon, so there will be, less and less people will join after me because there are not many people left, right? So there are not so many. The incentives now to join B are not that great. So it's really important that at that point is actually dominant to join B rather than A, okay? So that the posterior must cross at that point, sometimes during the bandwagon. So that, but you can write down conditions under which actually that equilibrium will be sustained. So again, with citation benefits that are a little bit more nuanced, like the ones that you are suggesting, we still get the bandwagon, but sometimes sometimes can switch on B. That's it. And again, we expected diversification and we didn't find any, which was kind of interesting for us. Again, very robust, this bandwagon.
So maybe some question from Steve.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I would just want to start with a comment, which I think, Mariagiovanna presented very as part of the model, but what a significant step it is to have two risky arms here in the model, and to be able to analyze that tractably is really, really impressive and very nice. And it's a long overdue step, because when we think about innovation, at least when I think about innovation and technological change, these researchers, agents, whoever they might be, are making a choice about what to work on. They're not just deciding whether to engage in something risky or pull the safe arm. That leads to the question of waiting, but I think the really big question is, what do they research and how does that affect the trajectory of science? How does that affect the trajectory of technological change? I think you look at the sort of empirical macro people who work on technological change, and it's all about which direction are we going in and the path dependence of that. And it's really stunning we don't have enough models, and particularly models like this with far-sighted behavior and an experimentation framework that do that. So I think that's a huge step, and I really like it. I thought the information flow plus with the assumption of irreversibility was very natural. Perhaps it's not irreversible, perhaps the costs are just really high, but everyone in this call is making investments in different research programs. Everybody who learned the techniques of information design, you're now at the research frontier of information design, and we're learning a hell of a lot about whether information design is a good research program to pursue. So that's exactly what's happening, and the cost is we're not learning as much about other approaches or other economic techniques. And so I thought that irreversibility plus the endogeneity of information flow led to these really interesting waves. I thought that one I commented on about the overshooting, where we all know that A is not very good, we all know B is probably better, but none of it none of us of those who are remaining are entering into B. Sorry, we're waiting. I think we can all think of examples of that in different research areas that we're working in economics. I think the questions I had, I was just looking at the chat. There's lots of questions there. I think we could sit here and nitpick. I could say, oh, well, why are there 2 risky arms? Why don't we have 10 risky arms? Why aren't they correlated? Why aren't we learning with Brownian noise and so on? I think that's a good sign that we've cracked open a new approach, a new kind of set of questions to explore. And so there's just so very naturally lots to look at. One other one I would be interested in is sort of, when there's 2 risky arms, we sort of want people to work on high value arms. And so maybe high value arms have a lower arrival rate of news or something like that. There's some heterogeneity across these 2 arms where one is a higher value one. Does the comparative static go or does the equilibrium go in the way society would want it to go? Do we get people working on these high payoff, but somehow sort of harder to find arms over a moderately risky field? And I think that would be another comparative static, another dimension of distortion that you could get at. But I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yes, I agree with this interesting direction. Let me mention, just since you mentioned potential extensions, let me say that we consider these fields A and B that are independent from each other. One could, as you say, enlarge the model a little bit and think about how a social planner could maybe create that menu endogenously, for example, right? So that's a question so we considered bad news, or good news, right? You can think about, for example, mixing, right? And they have like one arm that is good news, the other that is bad news. That's something, we haven't done it, we don't know what would happen, but one could think about taking the model in that direction. Also, one could think about taking the model, introduce correlation, like you mentioned. And I think that the model can accommodate correlation. You can see actually how positive correlation will modify things in a kind of like not too dramatic way, right? In the good news, for example, some positive correlation would actually delay the crossing of the 2 posteriors, right? And so on. So I think you can introduce some correlation in there without big, in a sort of, so the model is kind of rich in that sense. And multiple fields, like 10, that's more, again, we're doing, that's more ambitious. Just quickly, in the bad news case, somehow you could think about recursively build with multiple fields something. So think about, starting a wave on the most promising field of all, right? And then, some fields over time can drop out because bad news arrive on them. Okay, so they drop out of the menu. But when, for example, bad news arrive on the dominant field, the people that are left don't have an obvious choice anymore. Well, join the other. But now there are like many others to choose from. So maybe they can start creating a second kind of bandwagon wave, on some other field and so on. So we can actually maybe build.
I'm not advocating you have to do that here.
No, yes, because it's hard, right? Because one key.
Yeah, I don't even think it's necessary. I think the 2 is enough to show us how this balance works. So I'm just saying it would be a cheap comment to be able to say, put 17 dimensions in here.
Thought about it, it's hard because you need
But it makes me think of that, and that's what I think is good. You go to 2 and interesting things happen.
Yeah. Thank you. It's hard.
Okay.
Difference along the way.
So it's almost 5:15. So I think, just for organizational purposes, I'm going to declare the end of the official part of the seminar. So I'm going to thank Mariagiovanna, Steve, Julia, Gilat for joining us today, and of course, all the audience, and invite to stay a few minutes just for informal talk. Okay, so thank you again for all your participation.
Before we close, the next week is Pala Onuchik, if we forgot to say that.
Thank you.